So I work in a residential apartment, and it was a fairly new building. It was built where an old office tower used to stand, and now houses well-off residents. I was approached yesterday night by a lady who seemed quite at the end of her rope. She had just moved her stuff in on Wednesday afternoon and complained of a woman who kept trying to get into her condo. The new resident was alone on that Wednesday night, trying to unpack her bedroom boxes, when the front door began banging in the frame. She called out, and it stopped. Later on that same night, this time close to midnight, her front door knob began to rattle. She yelled again and called the night guard, but no one was found in the area. Thursday night, the same thing. Rattling doorknob and the door banging in the frame. So yesterday, I went upstairs with the woman to check her apartment area. Everything checked out. As I was leaving her suite, however, I almost ran headlong into an old gray-haired woman who was standing inches from the door. As any red-blooded Canadian would do, I jumped back like a scared little girl. The old woman stood her ground, looking between me and the new resident. "Can I help you?" I asked, regaining my composure and straightening my tie.
"No."
The woman answered plainly.
"I'm just waiting for the elevator."
And as if on cue, the elevator dinged and opened, and she got inside it. I attempted to follow, but was too late and the door slammed in my face. I asked the resident to come downstairs with me to review some CCTV footage. I honestly thought this was a family member of the previous owner who still had her building pass card and was confused and lost her way. The new resident and I rewound the footage for the floor and sat back to watch. When it got to the part where I opened the door, it appeared I jumped back at nothing. The hallway was empty. And I was talking to nothing. The lift had opened on cue, so that was something that strengthened my case, that I was not imagining things. But to this day, we are still not sure who it was, or rather what it was. It hasn't harmed anyone yet. And I hope it never does. Similarly, there was another incident where I worked before. This happened when I was guarding a corporate building on a night shift. A call had just come in over the phone from the high-rise. Apparently, a lawyer was possibly having a heart attack. I grabbed the AED and radioed for paramedics before jumping into the elevator and heading up. When I got there, the lawyer, let's call him Tom, was laying on the floor, clutching his chest and looking very ashen. His skin was clammy, he was breathing heavily, and was complaining of agonizing chest pains. I shooed his coworkers away and stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. At this point, he seemed to be slipping in and out of consciousness, and I was readying the AED in case it was needed. A while later, the paramedics burst out of the elevator and began doing their thing. They had a much better defibrillator, so I got the hell out of the way and began taking down names and times. Tom was conscious again and was begging the paramedics to help him. He didn't want to die, he didn't have a will set up, he needed to call his ex-wife, etc. Suddenly, Tom looked up towards the ceiling, over the medic's shoulders. His face, already pale, whitened even further. He tried to scoot backward on his butt, but the medics held him there, telling him to calm down. He paid them no attention, as if they weren't there, and screamed,
"I don't fucking believe it! No, no, no!"
And then he made a heavy sigh noise, and flatlined. They weren't able to bring him back. We still never know just what he saw. Although an urban legend says that in our dying moments, we see a reaper who takes us to the afterlife. Maybe he saw one that day. The look in his eyes shook me forever. He knew his time was up, before his time was actually up. I work for the military. And when I was posted in Afghanistan, we were in the mountains right on the Pakistani border. The first few months of the deployment were pretty hairy, but as soon as winter rolled around and the fighting season dried up, things got really quiet. Night shift went from when are we gonna get hit to what kind of weird shit am I gonna witness tonight? I think it was February or so, and I was out on guard in the north-facing machine gun shack. We all had night vision devices, and since it was pitch black, we always wore them on our night shifts. One night, I was looking out into the mountains when I see what looks like a dude coming crawling out from behind a boulder up the hill, about 100 meters away. It being the month of early February, we hadn't gotten hit in almost a month, because there were 2 feet of snow on the ground, and the temperatures were hovering right around zero, so the Taliban chucked deuces back to Pakistan and left us alone for the cold months. Now, this dude was on all fours, like a fucking animal. Just sitting there, half behind a boulder, seemingly staring into my soul. So I pointed the machine gun at him and turned on the visible laser. I put the laser right on his nose, and still didn't get any reaction out of him. Nothing. He just stood there and plainly stared at me. So at this point, I'm getting a little freaked out. Ever since I was posted here, I had been blown up, shot at, and almost had an RPG fired toward me, and now some local was playing games. I radioed into our tactical operations center that there was an unarmed local staring at me on the north post, and I either wanted someone to clear me to wax him, or come out and look at what I was seeing. The officer on the radio tells me that he's sending a private out to babysit me. I ignored the unnecessary dig at me, and waited for the guy to show up. The dude comes out, looks up at the hill at this dude, and promptly nopes the heck out. He then goes back to the TOC, and tells the operator that there really was a dude just staring at us out on the mountain. So the operator comes up to the shack, and I point this dude out. I shit you not, as soon as the guy gets eyes on the local, the dude jumps up, hops up on the boulder, and starts fucking screaming like somebody just dipped him in boiling water. Guard tower at the east corner can now also see the guy, and as soon as the crazy local started howling, East Shack loosened about a 30-round burst of bullets out over his head. That shit is really loud, and especially when it's dead quiet. The crazy guy jumps off the rock and runs down the mountain screaming the whole way. It was dead quiet the rest of the night, but the commander upped security to 50%, meaning half the dudes on our outpost had to pull security the rest of the night. The running joke for the rest of the winter was to be on the lookout for the mind control experiment that the CIA lost track of. This freaked me forever. I am quite certain that it was not a man. It was some sort of a creature or a cryptid. So my younger brother moved in with me a few weeks ago, and he got a job doing the night shift custodial work at a nearby high school. His daily work hours begin at 10 p.m., and fortunately for him, it's close enough to walk, because he gets off shift about 20 minutes after I have to leave for work in the morning, and he doesn't even have a car of his own. One night, a little after midnight, he calls me in a panic-stricken tone, asking me to come down and pick him up. I asked him what happened, to which he just said he needs me to come to pick him up because there was some kind of weird shit happening. I mean, those were literally his exact words. He quite clearly announced that there was no way he was going to stick around by himself. My brother isn't the sort to freak out over little things, so I hop in the car and head down towards the high school. Now to provide a little background and context, as a little kid, my brother was apparently sensitive to otherworldly stuff. He often talked about various seemingly supernatural encounters. He was very receptive to that kind of anomaly. In one very old house that we lived in, he told our parents that a man would come to his room at night and tell him bedtime stories. It wasn't until we were grown up that our father told us that a distant relative had committed suicide in the same room that was my brother's bedroom, years before either of us was born, and that my brother's description of the man matched the deceased relative. I think it was good on my parents' part to keep the story to them until we were adults. But at the same time, it was unbelievable that despite knowing that there was a ghost living there, they continued to live in the same house and did not move out. Anyway, I have given enough context about my brother. Now a little about me. I'm the exact opposite. Nothing creepy or supernatural ever happens to me or even around me. If it happened there before, it doesn't happen when I'm there, and often doesn't return after I leave. I've had enough perplexed people tell me that their ghost went away after I visited their house, or that a particular place stopped being creepy after I was there, or had someone acting crazy calm down when I talked to them. In a way, I was assumed to be some kind of natural repellent for creepy shit. Now back to the incident where my brother was calling me. So I get to the high school, and my brother is standing by the front doors. He runs over to the car and tells me that I have to come and make it stop. There was a sound of lockers opening and closing just out of sight. He would turn a corner of a hallway and hear a locker open and slam close behind him, or around the corner of the next hallway. But when he turned around, there was nothing. We went into the school, and my brother was practically hanging on my arm. We walk up and down all the halls. Nothing happens. No sounds, no movement, and no lockers opening or closing. No cold spots, no inexplicable drafts, no creepy noises or feelings. We walked down the last hallway, at which point it was almost 2 a.m., and I just wanted to go back home because I was tired and exhausted. At the end of the hallway, there's one locker standing ajar, and as we approach it, my brother reaches out to close it, pulls his hand back, and says,
You do it!
I close the locker with slight hesitance. But nothing happens. Finally, my brother says I can go, as long as I promise to come back the next night if there are any more problems. A week later, he comes home and hands me a thank you note and a $50 Amazon gift card from the head of the custodial department for services rendered by me. Yes, I got paid for being Dean Winchester who got solved a supernatural problem. But that made me a little curious, because the department paying me for it meant only one thing. They were aware of supernatural occurrences. And not just the people on the ground, they were aware even high up the management ladder. So I visited the office to speak with them. And they gave me the royal treatment. Later they told me that the lockers opening and closing were just one of the many things that were happening there. At times, things would go missing. The furniture would be seen moving in CCTV footage, and the faculty that left late would sense dread at times. Luckily, no one was ever harmed, but the complaints about these paranormal activities in the high school were a pain for the management, and they were glad that it all stopped after I arrived. I still remember that one time I worked nights for a uniform rental company, running the washers and dryers. It was a pretty easy gig for me, especially after I had been working there for 2 years, and Friday actually was my last shift. I got a transfer to the service department, which I start today. My shift in production ran from 12 to 9 a.m., and I'd take my first break around 2:30 in the morning. It was only one time in the 2 years that I've been there at that time, and I have been creeped out like anything. I go to take my break, handing off running the machines to our maintenance guy, and I walk out onto the main production floor. I have to cross this huge area covered with tight aisles of uniforms. As I'm walking past the uniforms, I get that feeling. The feeling like you're being watched. I felt my neck and arms break out in goosebumps, and I get this stupid random thought whispering in my mind. Don't look to the left or right. Keep your eyes locked forward and pretend nothing's wrong. That stupid thought got a grip on me enough to make me abide it. I walked straight and didn't look left or right, across the production floor and on into the break room, and rushed outside for a smoke. Immediately, the tension disappeared. I thought it would get worse, considering I was walking out into the dark, but no, it melted away like butter, and I calmly sat out in the night puffing away and telling myself I was being crazy. Every ounce of dread I had walking through the plant was gone, and I chalked it all up to an overactive imagination. But that wasn't the case. It wasn't mere imagination. In fact, those were my instincts. Survival instincts. They always alert us when we are being watched. But at that time, I blamed it on my imagination and relaxed until my break was over. I walked back into the plant and it hit me again, like a fucking wall. Every animal instinct I possess was screaming that something was watching me, and whatever it was, it didn't like me, and it wanted me out. The goosebumps came back and doubled. My face broke out, and the only thing I can equate it with is if you get a bad sunburn and your skin starts to feel too tight. By the time I got back to my work area, I was shaking. I don't believe in the supernatural, at least I didn't, but at this point, I couldn't think of anything that would explain that active malevolence that followed me through the plant. I even asked the maintenance dude if he felt anything strange, and he just gave me a stupid look, so I dropped it. In my work area, I was fine. Maybe it was because there were about 8 other people on the night shift, and around them, everything was relaxed. But the moment I walked over into the main plant area alone to unload clothes from the conveyor belt, I got that creeping dread, and I'd hurry along back to the others. After a few hours, I was good. The feeling went away. Whatever evil I was experiencing went away, or at least turned its attention elsewhere. Around 7 in the morning, I found out what that evil was. A fucking cat. Don't laugh. But yes, it was the devil's favorite pet, a cat. By this time the day shift had come in, and when I ran the conveyor belt, a fucking cat tore by like a bat out of hell. He must have jumped out the fence and came in through the bay doors and hid in the plant properly. We'd see cats outside all the time, so it's not really surprising one would get in. So all the feeling I got of being watched, I was right. But there was no paranormal stuff. I got stalked by a fucking stray cat. The project that my team was working on was nearing its end. Since the deadline was near, we were pulling an all-nighter and were working till 5 or 6 a.m. for the entire week. So not the night shift exactly, but close enough. Anyways, it hits 4:45 a.m. and I decided to head off home for some sleep and then come back in for 10 a.m. in the morning. I say goodbye to some friends and promptly begin to head back home, which is barely a 15-minute walk from my office. As I walk across the car park, I spot a guy walking on the pavement way on the opposite side. He was dressed in a full black tracksuit, with his hood up and cap down. Quite naturally, he came off as a suspicious guy, and me being kinda small, I kept my eye on him. I hit just towards the other 2 buildings on my work site, and I hear him shouting. I turn my head to look at him, and I see that he's clearly pointing it at me. He sounded very hostile, but I was unable to make out the words. I picked up the pace walking between these buildings, and decided to look back over my shoulder. And there he was, arms up in the air, and walking menacingly towards me in the center of the road. Now, just for better understanding and clarity, the car park we have is very big, and there would have been no way the guy would have crossed it in a minute or 2. I mean, that was how long it took for me to be where I was, without running. This guy was definitely out to terrorize me. I've never been stalked in my life, and at this point, a dry fear came over me. Immediately, I worked out my options. Firstly, I could run. The second option was such that I could just walk to the student dorms in view and pretend to be a student locked out. The other 2 options were that I could continue walking home, or worse, turn back and head to the office. I pretty much decided all of these were moot, as I didn't want to get chased at close to 5 in the morning, or be trapped outside a building with a guy who could easily catch up to me as I stood pretending, or let the guy know where I lived. This is especially since there were a lot of dark places around that I could just see myself being dragged down by the guy. Finally, with going back to my workplace, to avoid turning back on myself and him, I'd have to walk down an even darker alleyway, which I don't like doing during the day, let alone at night. So I just kept walking, picking up my pace, not enough to be obvious, but enough for me to make some distance between us. I walked past the dorms, turned onto the main road where there were street lights, and immediately took out my phone to ring one of my coworkers. I literally blew up his phone, as I kept my other hand in my pocket wrapped around my keys, such that if it turned nasty, I would have a weapon to do some small damage. Thankfully, after 6 times, the coworker picked up and immediately ran out to where I was, all while staying on the phone with me. I ended up dashing into the first takeaway place that was open, and just stood waiting for my coworker to appear. The guy never followed me down the turn I took to get to said takeaway. He must have just carried on walking. I got walked home, and whilst I was a little nervous walking home late at night afterward, I'm not afraid of doing it again. Just a little more cautious now, and I often tell someone when I'm about to head off that I'll message them when I get home. Nothing bad has happened since then, and that was close to 2 months ago now. I work in the emergency medical services, and it is literally a 24-hour job, be it day or night. One night, I picked up the duty on the night shift. We get a call for an unknown condition at an address that gets changed like 5 times, before we are flagged down by a frantic woman in front of a huge Masonic temple. She tells us that her boyfriend is the custodian there, and he is in charge of locking up every night. He texted her about 1 hour ago, saying that he had crushing chest pain and shortness of breath, and now he's not answering her texts. The door is locked, but she knows he's inside, because his car is there and there are lights that are turned on the inside. The huge wooden doors are locked, so we call for firefighters to break them down. They take like 20 minutes to smash a 12 feet tall wooden door off its hinges. Once we manage to finally enter, we realize that it's pretty spooky. I don't know if y'all have ever been in a Masonic temple before, but they're scary as shit with all the lights off. Marble floors and columns, lots of velvet curtains, and no light switches to be found. Me, my partner, my girlfriend, and 5 firemen start searching the place room by room, floor by floor. We are totally expecting to find a corpse, and possibly a ghost or two. We clear the first floor, and find nothing. We were terrified but at the same time on duty. Once the floor was cleared, we started to move up the stairs. An interesting thing about Masonic temples is that they tend to get stranger the higher up you go in them. By the 3rd floor of the temple, all of us are freaking the hell out, and even jumping at shadows. Somehow we push onwards to the 5th and final floor. At this point, we were just desperate to finish the search and get the hell out of that creepy place. It gave off a very negative vibe. At this point, there is a huge spooky chandelier above us, weird symbols painted everywhere, and even the fire lieutenant is getting freaked out. The top floor consists of a big room with a long hallway leading off it. All the way down the pitch-black hallway, we can see a door that has the lights on behind it. We slowly creep towards it, none of us wanting to be first in line. Eventually, we reach the doorway, and after a solid minute of silently miming who should open the door, my partner and I agree that we'll do it together. We take a couple of deep breaths, silently count to 3, and throw the door open. As our eyes adjust to the light, we see a middle-aged man jump up from a desk, rip off his headphones, and frantically try to turn off the super hardcore porn he's been watching. He, apparently, had texted his girlfriend saying he had had a burrito for dinner. He mentioned that the food didn't quite agree with him, and she had wildly misunderstood his text. As we all fled the building, we could still hear the couple arguing as he began to wonder how we had gotten into the building, and who would compensate them for their door. A fairly long time ago, I worked at a base in Japan. Now, most US facilities in Japan are former Japanese bases, and we share most of the bases with the JSDF. One particular night, I remember that I was guarding the fuel depot. No creepy spooky history to it. It was just a bunch of big hills where fuel tanks were and still are buried. There is a Japanese neighborhood just beyond the perimeter fence too. So hearing people carry on and seeing house lights are quite common in that base. Most of the watch, I sit in a guard shack, which is also the only entrance and exit point to the base. It's a big automatic gate that only I and the office has access to. But the office is locked because the fuel guys go home at 6 in the evening. So I'm locked behind the 12 feet of fence spanning a 200-yard area with only one entry point. This particular night in February, it's about 10 degrees outside, so I cringe to have to do my rounds because it's freezing outside. As I am doing my rounds, I spot what looks like a person sitting on one of the mounds. I walk up shining a light to see clearly, but I spot nothing. Then making my way to the next row, I climb up a mound and look back at the previous row, and there it is again. A person just sitting at the top of the mound. I hauled my butt over into the previous row, running about 5 mounds to where the spot is, and again nothing. I make the rest of my rounds and walk back to the guard shack. All this while, I could hear some movement around me. Also, a feeling of dread made me feel uncomfortable the whole time. Mind you, there were no people around me that I could run to. In case this was a cryptid, I knew I was in danger. And it was a military base, so no chance that a regular Japanese local just entered in and was trying to mess around with a guard. I rush my way back to the shack. I turn around and the thing, or person, or the spooky ghost is standing about 10 feet away from the guard shack. I jump inside, lock the sliding door, and just stare out the window. I really studied this thing. There are floodlights every 20 feet or so in the place, so it's actually lit up decently. At one point I get out and use the Japanese phrase we learn in security training. It goes "Tomeritsuzo," which means stop or I'll shoot. I don't know why, but to this day, that phrase wasn't doing anything. But what else was I supposed to do? It was so cold outside and it barely moved. Its hair was short and cropped around the ears. The body was average for a young Japanese adult. I couldn't tell the gender, and its clothing looked gray. The gray look might have been because of the lights above. About 20 minutes after my courageous standoff with the entity, my relief came and flashed its lights so I would open the gate. I saw the security vehicle hit the gate button and looked back and it was gone. I didn't even tell my relief because we probably wouldn't find anything anyway, and I wanted to get the hell out of there. Anyway, that's my night shift story. For a better understanding of this story, let me give you some context first, and then I will get to the creepy part. I worked at the janitorial and maintenance services for a local YMCA when I was in college. It was a brand new facility. Everything was modern and technological. All lights were motion activated to conserve energy, and every hallway had excellent camera security with audio. In this place, there was also a control room of sorts that fed all of the streams to a couple of monitors and housed the building's servers and sound systems. We used to call that room as the cave. Every year, we would have a week-long shutdown, which basically entailed all hands on deck to deep clean the entire facility. We'd do stupid shit to keep morale up, at some point while bleaching pulled grates in large 50-gallon trash cans. For example, I had to get naked to dump out the bleach water so as to not ruin my clothes. My best friend would set up ridiculous games she would invent in the gym with all the cool equipment they've got. Most importantly, we'd all get buzzed as hell on energy drinks, and we were allowed to drink alcohol if we wanted to, so long as we weren't handling heavy equipment or highly toxic chemicals. So basically, when we were doing mundane duties like mopping or scrubbing grout, we could drink freely. These shifts sometimes lasted 18 to 20 hours, because we were all broke and needed money, and it was kind of fun in between all the bitching and moaning from the stupid tasks that we were given, time and again. One night, we finished the pools and moved on to the offices. There isn't much technical shit to do in the offices, mostly just scrubbing walls, extracting the carpets, and dusting machines. As such, we designated it a chill night and brought some beer to keep the party going. All doors were propped open, including the cave door. It's well into the night and our boss ordered us pizza, so everyone is taking a break sitting in the common area in the office, cleared out for carpet extraction. This is where the creepy part of the story begins. Suddenly, I hear my best friend go,
Nope! Hell no!
And so we follow her eyes to the cave, and the security camera screens are flashing brighter one by one. Upon watching closely, we realize that we're watching a Zamboni tile scrubber drive itself up the hall and crash right into the racquetball court glass wall. And that's not the creepy part, because if you've ever operated a Zamboni, you know the fucker weighs almost a ton, and therefore when it's switched on, it has powered wheels to assist in pushing the monster around. We're all absolutely dreading having to clean up the resulting mess of glass, and not so subtly making plans to murder the idiot that left it on. That's when it gets creepy. Remember how I mentioned our super fancy camera system had audio recording? A voice whispers over the monitor,
"I'm sorry."
It was not a voice that we could immediately recognize. And then we realized that we're all here in the office, on the opposite side of the building. Every single one of us was here. And we have been in the same spot for almost an hour. And we had finished the pool deck already, so there was no reason to have the Zamboni out since closing up the night before. And we had already designated that night as an alcohol night, and everyone promised to not touch heavy equipment. If this was one of our own legit goofs up, whoever left the Zamboni on never confessed, and we were a tightly knit group, and word usually got around eventually. But to this day, we still don't know how it happened or who was at fault. Nothing spooky happened ever again. At least nothing that we noticed. But we had to clean the mess up that night. We did wait until the morning as we were all terrified by the paranormal possibility. Now I am not sure if this qualifies, but I do work at night. Being a thick-skulled teen overcharged with attitude and a loose grasp of what I should really be doing, I butted heads with my father frequently. I went to Job Corps, graduated, and got a real job. Being on the other side of a fairly large state of Alaska and out of work, I swallowed my pride and asked for assistance from my father. I asked my dad for a place to stay so I can escape the land of everlasting cornfields and get back on my feet. Despite actively applying and being on the delayed entry program for the military, I was on day 3 of the 3-day
No job in 3 days, you gotta go.
ultimatum given by my dad. So where does one go when you have no job, no place to stay, and don't know anyone in the state? You walk the streets because you have no car. Now here comes the creepy part. I'm walking down one of the main streets in Arizona in the winter. It being nighttime, it's also extremely cold, so I'm decked out in my traditional outfit. I just hope that nobody notices me, wearing all black with a black trench coat. I'm walking toward the local gas station to make use of the change I've accrued for my nightly meal, the 99-cent burger. And some random, scantily club-clothed lady walks past me, headed in the opposite direction. After walking about 10 feet past me, she says,
Hey, can you do me a favor?
I found that a little off, but I thought, okay, I'll bite. So I replied, it depends. She asks,
Can you walk with me? It's a few blocks to my house, but I really don't want to walk alone.
Once again it came off as a little odd, but I was like, fine. Okay, yeah, I suppose. We start walking and now I'm kinda on edge. I mean, I knew that this could very well be a bait to screw me up and take my coat or something. In another possibility, she got into an argument with her man, who's gonna show up and pull a gun on me. Either way, I'm waiting for the other foot to drop. As we walk, a few cars have passed, mostly police cars. I'm not thinking anything of it because I had been stopped like 7 times that night by random cops, stating that I fit the look of someone who pulled some stunt in town somewhere. After about 4 blocks of walking, she just says thank you and dips down a side street. The girl hadn't said 2 words to me the whole walk, so now I double back thinking screw it. I didn't get robbed or jumped, and the burger spot is open 24 hours. After 5 blocks, I was about 2 blocks away from the burger spot. I've seen a couple more cop cars drive past, and they all were at the said burger spot with their lights on. I head across the street and hit the gas station. While paying for my hot dogs, I tell the clerk, I guess the cops were seriously hungry. Dude cold looks me in the face and says,
Nope. Someone flipped out and shot the place up about 20 or so minutes ago.
I just blink in disbelief. Because about 20 minutes ago, I would have been sitting in that burger joint if it weren't for that random girl. Whoever, or wherever you are, girl, thanks, and I'm glad we got home safely. I was working night shift on a mine site that was shut down from production because the resource we were mining had dropped steeply in price. On the night shift, there were 2 blokes in the plant, a guy running the powerhouse from about a kilometer away, and me, the security or medic, and also the only lady all alone in the gatehouse. The site itself was about 1.5 hours from civilization, and even when I was on day shift, it gave me the heebie-jeebies. There was no toilet in my office, so I would have to walk across to the adjacent administration building, turn all the lights on, and walk all the way through it to use the ladies' room. I had worked in this field for a while at this point, and that too at many different sites, and I had never been worried or frightened before. And that too even when I was wandering around at night on my own in those places. But this place was different. My desk has a window, which has a direct view down the access road to the site, and as I'm sitting on my computer, I see movement out of the corner of my eye. There's a man walking down the access road toward the gatehouse at 3 a.m. in the night. my spidey senses screaming at me, but I don't falter. I email the powerhouse and advise that I have someone at the gate who can call in and check on me in 5 minutes, and open the service window to talk to my visitor. As he gets about 20 meters from the gatehouse, he vanishes. I shit my pants. I lock all the things and call the plant asking one of the guys to come over without telling him the exact reason. He arrives and can clearly see that I was shaken. I tell him what I had just seen, to which he casually replies,
Oh, that's just Dave.
and I was like,
Dave? Who the hell is Dave?
without any hesitation, he goes,
Dave is that bloke that died in the crib room. Didn't anyone tell you the story?
Well, no, they hadn't, and assuming he was just trying to freak me out, I conducted a little Google investigation, and sure enough, a man was shot nearby and was brought by his friends to the site for help. It was written that he died in the crib room. In case you don't know, the crib room is the lunchroom. So now I don't pee for my whole 12-hour shift, obviously, and close all the blinds. On my next swing, I come in on the day shift and I am doing the rosters. The night shift medic tells me in no uncertain terms. He begs.
Don't ever put me on nights here again. I refuse to do them.
He wouldn't tell me why. To which I just replied, It's okay, mate. I saw him too. Just shut the blinds next time onwards. A couple of years ago, I worked the night shift at a hotel. It wasn't super fancy, but it wasn't a seedy motel or anything either. In fact, it was in a decent area of town. It was geared for extended stay guests, who were mostly there for work. There were not a lot of late arrivals, so it was a pretty nice gig. I got paid to just kick it in the back room and browse Reddit until the sun came up, which is what I was doing with my nights anyway. After midnight, we locked the front doors. If someone sounded the buzzer, I could open the doors manually to let them in. One night, at about 1 in the morning, a young woman ran up and began pounding on the front doors. She was screaming at the top of her lungs.
Please help me! Open the fucking doors! Please don't let them get me!
Shit like that. So I opened the doors for her and grabbed the phone and punched in 911. She sprinted in, and I just watched the doors close behind her. Agonizingly slow, positive that her attackers would slip in before the automatic doors closed and locked again. But no one came. She kept babbling, telling me to call the police. Call the police, please, you can't let them get me. She kept saying them, which freaked me out more than anything. I was already calling the police, of course, and I told her as much, but this didn't seem to calm her down. I informed the police of the situation, and they immediately asked me if she had gotten out of a specific taxi. Now I won't disclose the cab company's name, but I didn't know if she had or not, so they said they were sending some officers over. After I got off the phone, she was a little calmer, but she kept looking frantically around the lobby. I tried to assure her that everything would be fine, but it didn't seem like she heard a word I said. She started to wander off down the hall, so I followed her. She went into our large breakfast room, where she backed herself up into a corner, now staring directly at me with increasing terror. I kept telling her everything was all right, and I did not approach her. I just wanted to keep her in my sight, but I had no desire to get close to her. I mean, she was in panic mode already. Me getting closer might just trigger it more. I tried asking her what had happened, but she would not respond. She just kept telling me I had to help her, and that she was afraid that they would get her. I told her it was okay, that I had called the police. She looked horrified at that, and asked me why I had called the cops on her. I explained I had called the cops for her, and not on her. I also clarified that the police would be there to help keep her safe. She responded to this with,
Don't fucking touch me!
I was roughly 50 feet away from her and had not moved at all. It was about then that my fear started to ease up, because I realized that there probably wasn't of them after all, and this girl was simply having some sort of mental breakdown. Or probably some drug-related effect. The cops arrived shortly after, and rather than being relieved, she she was scared of them and was reluctant to speak. They sat her in a chair in the lobby and tried to ask her name, but she just drew her knees up to her chest and started hyperventilating. Then she got up and speed walked down the hall. Cops ended up escorting her out of the building. She wasn't struggling or screaming, but she definitely seemed distraught and confused. When it was all said and done, I reviewed the security footage from outside the hotel, and it looks like she had been in a cab on the road next to the hotel. Then she had bailed out of it when it slowed down for the stoplight, and she had come running immediately to our front door, screaming. At no point was she pursued by anyone or anything. From what the police told me, the cab driver called the cops before I did, since she had skipped out on the fare. I never knew what happened to her after that. I didn't see her on the arrest reports, so I don't think they charged her with anything, and I hope they were able to get her somewhere safe. But that was one hell of a night. And nothing risky happened to me. But that incident scarred me for life. For the next few weeks, I would always have those haunting memories flashing. The way she begged for me to let her in, and then the entire scene inside the breakfast room, it was a traumatizing memory. Not exactly a night shift, but as a bartender, I'm usually heading home around 2 to 4 a.m. On a slow Monday night, we were about to close the restaurant when a seemingly homeless woman walked into the bar. Working in a city, we're used to vagrants making their way into the bar, so kicking her out would be easy. My manager yelled to her,
Hey, sorry! We're closing up! We won't be able to serve you! You'll have to leave!
She kept walking slowly and silently toward the bar, staring straight ahead with a blank face. As she walked closer, we realized she looked unusual for a homeless woman. Her skin was gray. I've never seen a skin color like hers in my life. It wasn't dirty or old or tanned. It was a very light gray that was tight with almost no wrinkles. She also had a tattoo of 4 lines on her face. They all started at one point in the center of her chin, and then continued down her neck in a ray-like pattern. She also had no shoes on. She looked like an alien or someone from a different world altogether. Once she reached the bar, she went to pull out a chair when my manager yelled again,
Hey! We're closing up! Also, you can't be in here without shoes on. You need to leave now!
She continued to sit down, then turned her head slowly to me. Locking eyes with me, she said,
I like you.
At this point, my finger was on the bar panic button. Just so you know, most bars have these bar panic buttons hidden behind the counters, so they can get immediate police response in case of an emergency. And having worked in a bar for over a year, I know all sorts of shit can go down here. But before I could press it, our bouncer finally made his way over and put his hand on her shoulder to ask her to leave. The minute he touched her, she broke out into this extremely loud, high-pitched, manic scream. It was like a scream out of a horror movie. What made it creepier, the whole time she was screaming, she was looking at me dead in the eye without blinking. The plain straight face staring at me made my blood run cold. I felt my knees were turning weak. She wasn't moving at all, so my bouncer went to forcibly remove her from the bar. I pushed the panic button and watched my bouncer pull away this woman as she was screaming uncontrollably, all while staring straight at me. The bouncer had to call another one just to control this crazy lady. Somehow this huge hunk was finding it difficult to handle this pale and sickly lady. Eventually, they pushed her out of the bar. I heard that she created a ruckus outside too. She even cursed the bouncers and the manager. And by cursed, I mean an actual curse and not just abuses. Fortunately, the police came fairly quickly and took the woman away. I did not see her ever again. The manager took a week off after that incident. And one of the bouncers even fell sick for a couple of days, right after that incident. When he returned, he described that her skin was hard like a crocodile's skin, and her tongue was pointy like a snake. To this day, that is still the creepiest night I've ever had at work. Night shift pays well, but it comes with its risks. I used to work at a pub that was 2 miles from my house. My shift ended at about 11 one night. I stayed there for a couple of drinks, then started walking home. Now, this had been an exceptional night for me tip-wise, and I had close to $400 in cash on me at the time. Between the pub and my house was exactly one street light about a quarter mile from the pub. The rest of the walk was in complete darkness. This too was a dark night. It was close to the new moon, and cloudy to boot, so it was almost pitch black. Now I live out in the boonies, so there isn't even much light pollution to help out. Not long after I leave the pub, a car slowly drives by me. About a quarter mile down the road, the car slows to a stop, and it just sits there. I stop walking and watch the car. It sits for a few minutes, then slowly drives away. A couple of minutes later, the same car comes slowly driving back by me in the opposite lane. It gets by me, drives a bit down the road, and slows to a stop again. Then it does a U-turn and starts creeping back down the road towards me with the lights off. At this point, I'm terrified to the core. I don't have a cell phone at the time, and there was no one around to see what was going on. The car is between me and the pub, so I can't get back to the safety there. My house is still about 1.5 miles away, so there was no way that I can quickly escape there. I think quickly, and I run off the road into the woods, and then I duck down behind a bush. I watch for the car, but it's too dark to see it with the lights off and bushes, trees along with the undergrowth between me and the road. I sit there for about 10 minutes, but don't see or hear anything. I'm about to make my way back to the road when I hear car doors closing. Now I'm really panicking. It feels like my chest is about to explode. The hair on the back of my neck is standing up. I keep imagining someone sneaking up behind me. I stay hidden and hope to God that whoever it is doesn't find me. I don't know how long I stayed there in that exact spot, but I eventually heard car doors again, and then heard the car passing by. I give it a couple of minutes, and then ease back to the road. When I see it's clear, I haul us back to the pub and let my boss know what happened. He said then and there that I'm never to walk home at night again. Either him, his brother, or his mom will give me a lift home. When the other servers and the kitchen staff heard what happened, they all said the same thing. I have never been that terrified before. Since I work night shift in a psych facility, I have experienced and seen a lot of crazy things. Things and incidents that made me want to even quit working here. Basically, I've seen a lot of things working at night. From people coming in high and psychotic, to people huddling naked in the corner of a room whispering something. The scariest thing I have ever seen was a patient coming out to the nurse's station and saying someone is outside of their window looking in. From admission, they had been experiencing pretty strong hallucinations, so we assumed this was another one. So we weren't much bothered by the claims. But the patient kept insisting. Now, to provide some ease, we went into the room to verify that there was no one there. Honestly, it was to provide them some relief and comfort. We have removable draw curtains in rooms, and they were closed shut. We even walked up to it and asked if it was that specific window. The patients told us that it was the case. We shook our head and gave one another a look. Eventually, we drew it open and had quite possibly the biggest scare of my life. There was somebody standing there wide-eyed and staring right back at us through the window. He ran off when we saw him. He did not utter a word. He was just standing there all the time, watching. The moment we saw him, he did not say or scream or make any kind of sound. He just grinned at us, turned around, and dashed in the opposite direction. We ended up calling the police as well as the security. They never found the guy and we never saw him again. It still creeps me out to this day. I wonder what he wanted from the patients. He was getting some pleasure out of just watching them. Though I have a few paranormal stories to share from my night shift duties, the creepiest stories are sometimes involving people who are just plain weird. I used to work with a popular gaming company and became the shift supervisor for the 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. One of my CSA representatives was a bit on the creepy dude type. He tends to freak out some of our female staff with some inappropriate jokes, which borders more on lack of tact rather than actual sexual harassment. He'd mostly stop if I tell him so. One evening during our 2 a.m. lunch break, the girls would go down in groups to a nearby 24/7 KFC or McDonald's across the street, while some of us would go to various parts of the floor where we hang to have breaks. The girls came back scared. One was also a supervisor. Apparently, creepy dude was at the main lobby, talking to someone who wasn't there. Make matters worse, he brought a weapon with him. Naturally, my girls were freaked out, and the guys on my floor won't approach him. I was tired, swamped with work, and had a deadline for a report in a few hours, so I did not need this shit at this time. So I went down, and sure enough, my creepy CSA is having a livid conversation with Air. I followed him all the way through to the elevator landing, where he was having an argument with some invisible person. He reminded me of an angry Italian with his hand gestures. Normally I would be freaked out too, but since I was tired and hungry, or like the kids call nowadays hangry, that overrode any fear I had. And the weapon, it was a kendo sword. I knew it because I took kendo in my college years. He would swing that kendo sword around a bit. Pretty much the guy was schizo freaking out. He also had this glassy look in his eyes. I yelled,
What are you doing?
He turned to face me, just staring. We did a few seconds of a stare off. But again, I was not having any of this and said,
Dude, you know bringing a sword to the office is against company policy. Are you done with the report?
Like a switch that just turned on, he finally responded how his dead sister was following him, harassing him, and was on her way to harass the girls. He may have touched the hair of one of my girls too, which at this point made me livid. I forgot exactly what I told him after, but told him to give me the sword and go back to the office to finish off his work. He obediently complied, and an hour after, I made the whole "come see me in my office" routine. He spoke to my managers, where he was given some sort of discipline. He wasn't fired for that incident. And to be honest, he was scared of me after that. Anyway, I kept my eye on this guy for the remainder of my time with the company, as I am dead sure he was legit crazy. I also told him if he needs help with his sister, to seek professional help. He did a few more creepy stuff, and would still talk to thin air or walls, or a pencil case, but not as bad as the incident with the kendo sword. On my last day with the company, he gave me his kendo sword as a parting gift. He had my name carved into it. Pretty nice sword. It now hangs above my bedroom. He did got fired a year later due to creepiness and performance issues. So I work at a cafe in the downtown area. And where I work, there are quite a few homeless shelters in range, and a huge drug problem in the vicinity. One day I'm working behind the bar, and this redhead kid, who was probably in his early 20s, sits down in our seating area and starts chanting shit under his breath. After a minute or two, he starts moving his hands around like he's casting a spell. He then gets up, starts yelling and disturbing everyone. I walk over to him and tell him that he needs to leave for the day. Dude looks at me straight in the eye and says,
This is all a giant game. I'll fucking kill you with one finger.
At this point, I was like, whatever. You see, I get death threats a lot down here, so that was no biggie. I shoo him on his way, and that's that. Fast forward to when we're closing up, around 9 p.m. Yes, it is not technically a night shift, but it gets dark up here, so it counts as one. I lock the doors and start heading to the parking garage where my car is parked. It's probably about 6 blocks away, and that was no big deal. During winters, up here it is insanely dark. So it's already pretty creepy in downtown. About a block or two of walking, and I hear this hissing noise. I freak the fuck out, because I can't see anyone around. I pick up the pace a bit, then I hear hurried footsteps in the snow behind me. I was too scared to look around. I rushed it to the staircase toward the garage, because I wasn't going to wait for the elevator. I'm about a staircase up, and I hear the door I just went through slam shut. I finally make it to my car, get in as fast as possible. I look around, and guess what? There's the redhead from earlier. Only this time he's fucking furious. He sees me in my car and books at full speed and starts hitting my windows screaming,
I'm going to fucking kill you.
I door checked him and drove the heck away. I called the cops the next morning and they found the dude. Apparently he thinks he's in the Illuminati and completely corroborated my story to the police. Small jail time and 1 restraining order later, never seen him again. Shit like this happens a lot in the town I work. I worked at Walmart night shift for a while. Every single Friday night without fail, this old woman with 2 children would come in at around 10 or 11. She was obnoxiously loud as she shopped. She always grabbed a bunch of different things and stuffed it all in her cart, a few times asking one of our employees to help her grab something. Every Friday night, it was the same thing. Her talking voice was almost yelling for people like us and stayed in the store sometimes until 5 a.m. I worked 10 to 7 in the morning. She grabbed a cart full of stuff, which seemed like it was from every section of the store. She would do this with her 2 girls, and the weirdest part wasn't even that. It was the fact that she would leave her cart somewhere and walk out with nothing. Spent hours in the store grabbing a bunch of shit with her 2 kids and walked out without anything every Friday. I never figured out why. It's not creepy scary, it's more creepy weird. There was also a creepy sad time where this woman was shopping and she was obviously high on drugs. Her face showed it. She was basically unresponsive to anyone and anything as she walked through the store. I only saw her once walking by with her kid. He was about 7 saying things like,
Hey, can you hear me? It's me. Why aren't you talking to me?
And stuff like that. Really sad. But yes, those are my overnight stories. I don't work there anymore. I don't exactly work a night shift, but I get off work later than the average person in the workforce. And when I leave my office, I have to take a 1.5 hour of train or bus ride to get home. And I regularly see some weird and creepy people at bus stop late at night. I could give a lot of random stories of weird, eerily funny, or scary things that have happened at these bus stops. But this one incident has stuck with me. And it still bothers me when I think about it. It was this random dude talking to someone on the phone. He had a hood on, so I couldn't actually see the phone, but I figured it was a phone in his hand since he was pausing for a response after saying a line or 2. I mean, there was always a possibility that the dude was a meth head who just smoked up and got to the bus stop and started speaking to himself. Generally, people who are just rambling to nobody don't take those pauses. So he's ranting about how the Constitution is a universal law, and the amendments weren't hammered in enough to support it correctly, and how when you take vitamins, you sweat toxins out of your feet after. He even paused during his explanation of how that worked, and clarified something that he had mentioned previously. I mean, it was at a normal level of crazy for a phone conversation, and nothing too weird to be honest. But then he started saying something that I still can't forget.
So, this is how I speak to myself. This is how I speak to myself, and I speak to myself all the time because I have to. That is because that's the only way to realize the truth. Every single thing that they ever told you is a lie, a big fat lie, and you've got to talk to yourself to stop being indoctrinated. You know, when the teachers all said, be a good kid and stay in school. And they wouldn't lie to you, you would think your teacher wouldn't lie to you. But they do. They just don't want us to see through their lies. They don't want us to see and know and understand what the government does. And the last thing that they would ever want is for us to learn how to harness those powers. I might sound like a lunatic right now, but you have to trust me. I took this pill and now my eyes have opened. I can see everything clearly. This is all an illusion. This is all one cage that they have put us in. We have to find our way out. and I will help you find it.
He was starting to cry at that point. I was creeped out. Not by what he said, but by his increasing rage and anxiety. He seemed to be on the edge. And I was the only one around him. The last thing I'd want is to catch his attention. I froze in my seat as he continued ranting. Then he rushed up the stairs on the side that led to a medium-sized overbridge. I was relaxed as he was going away from where I was. And I could also see the headlights of the bus approaching. I guess he didn't have anyone on the phone with him after all. It was just his hand on his jaw while he spoke to himself all this while. My eyes widened with shock as I watched the next series of events unfold after my eyes. As the bus was passing through the underpass, this crazy dude shouted,
Let's wake up from this!
and jumped off the bridge. I saw him fall down and crash into the bus from the top. He wasn't falling from a height that would kill him. So he landed with a loud thud and got severely injured. The driver came out stressed. He was worried about his job, and I assured him that it wasn't his fault in any sense. I called the ambulance instead of trying to help the drug addict. I felt bad about it, but it's not a good idea to engage with an obviously unstable drug addict regardless, so I did not walk up to him to try and put some sense in his head. The paramedics arrived and took him away. But that incident still bothers me. I worked the night shift at a large grocery store. The store wasn't open overnight, but it had a skeleton crew to work on the loads and do preparations and clean up the place. I worked near the entrance of the store. It had large glass doors, but it was visually blocked off from my vantage point. Around 2:30 a.m., I hear knocking on the doors. This isn't completely unusual to me, because usually it's someone coming in for an early shift, but didn't carry a key card to open it. Or sometimes it's someone's food delivery, or at times a customer who thinks we are open despite clearly being closed. I approach the door, and it's a man that I don't recognize. He was drenched from the rain that was pouring outside. He looks normal enough, but something about him unnerved me. He had that vibe to him that alerted my senses. He had the vibe where it seems like maybe they were on their way to becoming full-blown meth head, but for now, they still managed to give the appearance of being normal. He was holding his shit together just enough to appear normal, but the edges were definitely shaky. Anyway, without unlocking the door, I announced that the store was closed. He told me that he just needed my help because his car had broken down in the parking lot and he needed a boost. I didn't drive, so I told him I couldn't help him. Now I should have walked away then and there, but he was out in the rain, and I genuinely felt bad for him, so I told him I would see if anyone of our little crew did drive. I did find someone who was willing to help, and also got the night crew manager involved too. We went out, and it turned out that he was parked a bit off from the entrance, in a fairly secluded spot, and he had a lady with him. There was a similar vibe with her too. I mean almost, but not exactly normal. It didn't click right away, but I figured they had been hooking up in the car in the parking lot, and maybe left the radio or lights on, and drained the battery. To me, that explained the weird unnerving feeling that they either felt ashamed or guilty, and it was showing through their body language. Anyway, my coworker goes over to help give them a boost. The manager and I stay out there with him, watching him for any sneaky moves. The two lovebirds kept peeking over at us a bit uncomfortably. And after a few moments, the coworker returns from the car and then hurried us to go back inside the store. We don't see them drive off, which seems odd. We get inside, lock up again, and then the coworker thanks us for staying out there with him and not leaving him alone with them. He also caught on to the unnerving air about them, and it made him worried about his safety. What worried him more was when it also turned out that there was absolutely nothing wrong with their car. We aren't sure what they wanted. Were they trying to kidnap one of us that would have come out alone instead of in a group? I mean, if I would have gone out to help, then they had ample opportunity to take me with them. And in our store, such cases have happened before where people have gone missing. I am thankful to myself for being alert and sensible in handling the situation. I I work the night shift and I absolutely hate recalling this story. I work the night shift at a rehabilitation facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above. And we also have one of those doorbell cameras. In the office, the camera's monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on the opposite wall. I was doing some paperwork that night and I saw this random dude walk past the facility's entrance, then stop for a few seconds, and then slowly turned around, subsequently walking back only to stare up at the camera like a creep. And he didn't stop after a moment. He just kept staring into the soul of the camera. Now the facility where I work is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to such dudes hanging out around the gate, and I usually ignore it. But the way he was staring down at the camera was off-putting. Apart from staring endlessly, his eyes and his expressions were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something sinister. I was pretty sure he was high on something or the other. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera without responding to my questions. We have a rule that we follow at our workplace. If the person outside is not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let them be doing whatever they are. No sense in engaging needlessly with somebody who is potentially hostile. It would be like inviting unnecessary danger. So he stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours straight. He didn't move too. I had to endure that same dead-eyed expression, staring right at me for 2 hours through the monitor. I tried to focus on my paperwork, and there were no other colleagues with me that night. So it made it even more creepy. After some time, I did a round inside the facility as per my routine, and came back to find him gone. Now that only creeped me out more. I mean, where did he go? Did he climb inside? I waited in the facility until the morning staff arrived. I did not know how to handle the camera's software. Else I would have rewinded the part where he left to get some closure. But I didn't. This story did not happen to me. So it is not my personal creepy encounter, but I used to work at a small motel, and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about half an hour past midnight when she got a call at the front desk. She picked it up and it was from a man. Instead of inquiring about booking a room or anything about the address, the man just said that he was with his 18-year-old daughter, who supposedly dances at a competitive level, and he needed advice on what she should wear for a competition. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager,
What about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy to wear?
She was creeped out by that line itself. But later he proceeded to talk in unnecessary graphic detail about how he thought that his own daughter had been trying to seduce him for weeks, and how he had started to enjoy seeing her dance in those cute outfits. My manager kept stalling him on the call despite all the creepiness, and meanwhile, she was looking through a computer system, trying to figure out who this man was, so she could call the cops. However, the room that he was reportedly in was empty. Unfortunately, the man ended up hanging up the phone call before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple of months later, at around 11:30 p.m., my manager answers the desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She replied,
Let me guess, you might want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings? Am I correct?
The man immediately hung up the phone and never called again. I hope he was just talking shit while fantasizing, instead of it being a reality. I work the night shift at a popular coffee shop. I can't name it because I don't want this to escalate. It was about 3:30 a.m., and there is one old baker in the back that rarely interacts with me apart from a dirty joke in between. He always claimed that he was from the Navy, but I hardly think so. Other than that, I'm working all alone at night. And not just in the coffee shop, but there isn't another soul around the area as well. I mean, of course, it was sleeping time for regular people, and I expected it to remain that way for at least an hour from then. I was filling up the food boxes that were a day old so that I could give them to the homeless shelter. As I was doing it, I swear I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I could see the movement in my peripheral vision, and whatever it was right behind me. I turn around and see no one. And as my eyes are searching everywhere, I gasp as I look down. There was a small child standing there. A native little toddler with a faux hawk, who was for some reason staring at me intensely. I'm dumbstruck by how absurd the situation was. How did she get behind the counter? I didn't hear the door open or see him come through the counter either. I scanned the storefront with a quick glance. There was no one there. I yelled for the baker in case he has a friend or someone visiting that had possibly lost their kid. The baker comes over, and just like me, he does a double take at the kid and is equally baffled. If it wasn't weird already, suddenly the kid starts muttering incoherently. I get him a glass of water and a donut, while the baker runs out of the store to do a perimeter check of the block. I called the non-emergency line, and I explained that I had found a little kid with no parents. I tried speaking to the kid, but I just couldn't get any information from the boy. He was responding, but more often than not, he was just mumbling something which I couldn't make out at all. The police arrive after a few minutes. The baker had come back from the block, and he said that he couldn't find anyone else in the streets. The guy from the corner store that used to be open 24/7 said that he would keep an eye out. The police try to speak to the kid, and they also get nothing but mutterings and half-hearted gestures. They take him away to the police station. I see the cops again for their morning coffee, and they told me that the little-head guy walked several miles from the nearest reservation in the dead of night to my store. He had gotten into his parents' medicine cabinet and just walked out of the house. I was stunned. It must have taken those poor baby hours to get to my store. And seeing him behind me like that in the dead of the night still shakes me. It spooked me more than the guy that threw a cup of coffee at me, and the woman that tried to stab me with a plastic spoon because I refused to give her a metal one. It was in fact scarier than the dude that waited around for 4 to 5 hours, hoping to catch me alone just so that he could teach me a lesson, since I didn't have the flavor of bagel that he desired to eat. Night shifts are either fully peaceful or absolutely crazy. There is no in-between here. During my early 20s, I used to work night shifts at a Home Depot. There was one time when for a week or so, our store stayed open for 24 hours. Most of the time, this wasn't really a problem for us workers over there. As in typically, nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 3 in the morning. I mean, in those 2 weeks, only 2 or 3 times did anyone show up at that hour. There was this one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 a.m. in the morning, and the woman was wearing a nasty dress. Apart from them, there was also this one young woman who came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I guess there was some last-moment emergency. But the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3:30 a.m. in the morning, and one guy and I were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays, and doing some other maintenance work. A bunch of big R30 insulations had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them, a freakish hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy I was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store and came to check out the issue. It turned out that a homeless drunkard had managed to find his way and enter through the store's security at some point. The dude was in bad shape too. As in, he was far gone into whatever he was addicted to, such that we had to call the police to remove him from the store. I was always a little extra cautious and alert around the insulation bay after that, at least for the time the store stayed open for 24 hours. I worked over the night shift as the security at a convention center for a couple of years. One night at like 1 a.m., I was on camera, chit-chatting with another officer who was manned at what we called the base. I had 2 other guys and my supervisor out on patrolling duties. I saw a homeless dude go up our outdoor elevator to a public terrace, and I was keeping an eye on him. It was no big deal, to be honest. Just keeping an eye out if anything happened. He goes to a corner that is a blind spot for the cameras in the center. The corner was known to us for usually catching a quick nap. I call on the radio to our nearest patrol officer. He was also patrolling with my supervisor, and I inform him that this person was hanging out at that spot there, doing something. They casually start walking toward the area to find out what he was up to. Upon their arrival at the designated spot, the next thing I know is that on another camera directly below this terrace's corner, like 40 feet below, I see a body drop straight down and land on its legs, collapsing to the concrete floor. I quickly stand up from my chair and I am panicking, thinking of a potential suicide, or worse, a murder. I grab the first aid kit and run out of the office to go outside. My other officer on base jumps on the phone and calls the paramedics. I'm the first one there, and this homeless man was howling in pain, shattered bones protruding from his ankles, bleeding from the mouth, trying to mumble something. He manages to roll over and I see his hands are also fucked up, more bones protruding from his wrists. I don't dare to touch him, and I doubted my first aid kit would have helped at all. My supervisor and the other officers come running down the stairs to the scene. Apparently, when they arrived at the spot I told them, they saw him standing on the edge and looking down. My supervisor had called out and asked him to turn around, when he suddenly dropped dead like a plug was removed from the socket. The first responders arrive and take him to the hospital. I of course had to write the report and review the video of the incident. A cop comes an hour and a half later and shares his condition that he survived, but will most likely never walk again. A few days later, I get a new roommate who brings his girlfriend over. We're all hanging out, talking, and drinking. I share that I work for security at the place, and the new roommate's girlfriend asks me about the guy who jumped off the building. Now I was stunned. I mean, how did she even know that? There was no media coverage. She wasn't there either. Then I got to know that she was best friends with his wife. She shares that he was a homeless alcoholic junkie. She got the call that he attempted suicide and rushed with his wife to the hospital. She told that he was better and improving well. My roommate shortly broke up, and I never saw her again. I hope he got better with time.